All right, let's talk about the single most popular way to figure out what something is worth. I'm talking about anything, a company, a house, even a concert ticket. It's called relative valuation. And here's the thing, pretty much everyone uses it, but it's a tool that is absolutely packed with paradoxes and some serious pitfalls. So let's dive right in. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, let's start with something super familiar. Imagine you're buying a house. The realtor throws out a number, $500,000. Now, how do you think they got that number? Did they sit down with a spreadsheet, calculate all the potential rental income for the next 30 years, factor in every possible maintenance cost, and then discount all of that back to today's value? But no way, of course not. What they really did was way simpler. They just looked at what similar houses right there in the neighborhood sold for. And that, right there, in a nutshell, is relative valuation. So, when you're trying to value something in the world of finance, you basically have two roads you can go down. On one side, you've got what's called intrinsic valuation. This is the really detailed, bottom-up approach. You're meticulously building a case for what an asset is worth based on its own ability to generate cash, its growth, its risk. Then, you've got the other road, relative valuation. And that one, that's all about looking at the neighbors. You're not looking at the asset itself so much as what the market is willing to pay for other, supposedly similar things. And right here is where things get really interesting, because this leads us to a huge contradiction, a real paradox that sits right at the heart of the financial world. It's this massive gap between what finance professionals are taught is the right way to do things and what almost every single one of them actually does in the real world. Check this out. When you look at what happens in the classroom, it's fascinating. You teach finance students both of these methods, right? The rigorous intrinsic way and the simpler relative way. Then you ask them, which one do you think is better? Which one do you prefer? And the results are just overwhelming. For decades, about 70% of them say, yep, intrinsic valuation, the detailed fundamental approach, that's the one for me. Only a tiny fraction, maybe 20%, say they prefer the relative method. But then they graduate. They go out and get jobs on Wall Street. And when you look at what they actually do, the story completely flips. A huge study of equity research reports from all over the world found something shocking. For every one report that used that better intrinsic method, there were 10 that used relative valuation. 10! So the very method that students reject in theory becomes the absolute king in the real world. So what is going on here? It makes no sense, right? If intrinsic valuation is supposedly the more disciplined, the more fundamentally correct approach, why does almost everyone end up using relative valuation? What makes this simpler and, let's be honest, potentially more dangerous tool so darn irresistible? Well, it turns out the answer has less to do with finance textbooks and a whole lot more to do with human psychology. The reason relative valuation is so popular, it comes down to some really powerful, really basic human instincts. Really, you can boil its popularity down to 3 big reasons. First, it's just way easier to sell. Second, it's way easier to defend. And third, and this might be the biggest one, there is a ton of safety in numbers. Let's break down each of these. Okay, first up, it's just easier to sell. A valuation is often just a sales pitch, right? And this Seinfeld quote about Kramer just nails it. You don't need some complex 100-tab spreadsheet. With relative valuation, all you have to do is find something even more ridiculously priced than what you're trying to sell, point to it and say, hey, if you think this is crazy, look at that. It's brilliant. As long as you're the one picking the comparable companies, you can make literally anything look like a bargain. Reason number 2, it's so much easier to defend. Think about it. When you build an intrinsic valuation, you have to lay all your cards on the table. Your exact growth rate assumption, your risk premium, your cash flow forecasts. Everything is right there in black and white. And that means anyone can attack it. But with relative valuation, you just say, oh, the company's worth 12 times EBITDA. All those same assumptions about growth and risk are still there. They're just hidden. They're baked right into that single number. And if people can't see your assumptions, well, they can't pick them apart, can they? And the third reason? Pure, simple safety in numbers. I mean, let's be real for a second. Being the lone genius who is right when everyone else is wrong feels amazing, in theory. But being the lone person who is wrong, that's a great way to get yourself fired. With relative valuation, if you get it wrong, chances are you're in good company. A whole crowd of other analysts probably used the same multiples and got it wrong too. It's a survival instinct. It is always, always safer to be wrong with a herd than to be wrong by yourself. Okay, So we've established that this tool is everywhere, it's powerful, but it's also super easy to mess up. So how do we actually use it correctly? The key, the absolute key, is to bring some discipline to the whole process. And we can do that with a straightforward 4-step framework. The process is simple. Define, describe, analyze, and then apply. And it has to be in that order. This is so important. Most people make the mistake of jumping straight to the last step, apply. They just grab a multiple they've heard about and slap it on a company without really understanding it. And that, my friends, is where all the trouble begins. All right, step 1, define the multiple. And before you do anything else, you have to ask one crucial question. Is it consistent? See, every multiple has a top number, the numerator, and a bottom number, the denominator. The rule is dead simple. You have to be comparing apples to apples. If the number on top is a value that belongs just to the equity shareholders, then the number on the bottom better be an earnings figure that also belongs just to them. If the top is a firm value, the bottom needs to be a firm value. You can't mix and match. Here's a perfect example. The good old P/E ratio, price to earnings. That one's consistent. Price is the value of the equity, and earnings, net income, is what's left over for those equity holders. It's a perfect match. But now look at a really common one, price to EBITDA. Houston, we have a problem. Price is still just the equity value, but EBITDA is an operating income number before you've paid the debt holders. That income belongs to the entire firm, both debt and equity holders. It's a total mismatch. So who cares, right? Why does this tiny detail matter? Well, it matters a lot. Because if you use an inconsistent multiple, it will systematically fool you. Think about it. A company takes on a ton of debt. What happens? Its equity value, the number on top, goes down. But its EBITDA, the number on the bottom, doesn't change at all. And this mismatch makes companies with lots of debt look super cheap. But it's a mirage. They don't look cheap because they're a great investment. They look cheap because the very tool you're using to measure them is fundamentally broken. Okay, on to step 2, describe. This means you need to understand how your multiple behaves out in the wild, across the whole market. Whatever you do, never just grab some industry average you read somewhere. Instead, you've got to look at the full picture, the whole distribution. What's a high number for this multiple? What's a low one? What's typical? And what you'll almost always see is that these things are not neat little bell curves. They're skewed. A multiple can't go below 0, but it can be sky high. This means a few wacky outliers can drag the average way up and give you a totally distorted picture. And the basic rule of statistics is clear here. When your data is skewed, you trust the median, not the average. Now we get to step 3, analyze. And honestly, this is the most important part. This is the big secret. Every single multiple out there, I don't care if it's PE, EV to sales, you name it, is just a shortcut. It's like the condensed, pocket-sized version of a full-blown intrinsic valuation. Buried inside that one little number are all the same big drivers, assumptions about a company's future cash flows, its growth, and its risk. And your job, as a smart analyst, is to dig in and make those hidden assumptions visible. And at last, we get to step 4, apply. Now, this is where we actually pick our comparable companies, but we have to completely redefine what that word means. A comparable is not just a company that happens to be in the same industry. That's lazy. From a valuation point of view, a truly comparable company is one with similar fundamentals. That means similar cash flow potential, similar growth prospects, and similar risk. A fast-growing software company might actually have more in common with a fast-growing medical device company than it does with some old, slow-growing legacy company in its own industry. What this really means is that this last step isn't about cherry-picking companies to tell a good story. It's not about finding that Kramer across the hall. It's about disciplined, honest analysis. The real goal is to find firms that are genuinely similar, and then, and this is key, mathematically adjust for the small differences in their growth and their risk to come up with a valuation that's fair and, most importantly, defensible. You know, this quote from the source material really just hits the nail on the head. The problem isn't that relative valuation exists, or even that people use it. The problem is that most people use it, well, shoddily. They use it badly. They skip the first 3 steps and jump right to applying a number they don't really understand. And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. Relative valuation is powerful, it's popular, but it's also dangerously seductive because it seems so simple. So the next time you hear someone, an analyst, a realtor, anyone, justify a price with a simple multiple, just stop and ask yourself, are they using the multiple, or is the multiple, with all of its hidden biases and invisible assumptions, actually using them?